Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a room where your social worth is as visible as your tunic stain. You've been invited to a Roman dinner party as Cena at the home of a senator whose wealth smells like olive oil and overcompensation. You don't just walk into these things, you get summoned. And from the moment you cross the threshold of his grand domus, your body becomes a chess piece in a ritual of class, subtle insults, and slow digestion. A servant opens the door just wide enough for you to feel judged. You enter through the vestibulum, which is just a fancy Roman word for awkward foyer with echo. The air hits you with myrrh, dust, and cooked leeks. You pass under the gaze of ancestral masks lining the walls, dead family members silently reminding you that you're probably not important enough to even glance at them. You try to act casual, but your sandals stick slightly to the marble, and the atrium feels like a stage. The water in the central impluvium, a shallow pool meant to collect rain ripples gently. Even though there's no breeze, the ceiling above, open to the sky, seems to mock your very modern desire for ceilings that actually keep weather out. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're led deeper into the house, where colored mosaics underfoot depict cheerful dolphins and surprisingly violent cupids. You pass doorways that offer slivers of other people's laughter rooms, where lesser guests are already reclined, loudly pretending they're not nervous. Because here's the thing, Roman dinner parties are traps. Elegant, oil-lit, cumin-scented traps. You won't just eat, you'll be evaluated. Your seating placement will determine how many olives you get, how much your opinion will be listened to, and whether the host thinks you're useful, pathetic, or both. Even the entry process is layered. You're not the first to arrive. The senator has invited a mix of people, senators, equestrians, that one philosopher who won't shut up about destiny, maybe even a poet or two to provide entertainment and serve as cautionary tales. The highest status guests have already been welcomed. You're somewhere in the middle, which is both a blessing and a curse. You get to observe, but you're also being watched. A slave hands you a small damp cloth to freshen your face, lavender-scented, but clearly reused. You do your best to wipe off the sweat without looking too grateful. Gratitude is for the poor. You're aiming for indifference. In the peristyle garden, things are more relaxed. You smell crushed herbs and sweet wine, see statues of fawns caught mid-giggle, and pass a fountain that's been trickling since someone conquered Carthage. It's here that some guests mingle, offer false compliments, and mentally size each other up before the big event. And you're trying not to step on anyone more important than yourself. A short, balding man approaches. He grins too widely and tells you that you're lucky to be invited tonight. His name is Marcus something. You know his type? A freedman who made his money through shipping and now desperately wants the elite to forget he ever had a job. He drops names like Amphore on purpose, and always loudly. When I dined with Lucius Verus, we discussed elephants. Right. You nod, sip your first watered wine, and realize this is not just dinner, it's an audition. Meanwhile, servants begin the pre-dinner ritual, placing garlands near the door, lighting extra lamps for ambiance, and subtly preparing the host's entrance. You notice a boy struggling with an enormous silver platter. It's empty for now, but soon it will carry roasted dormice or stuffed sow's udder, delicacies that are less about taste and more about signaling obscene wealth. Romans believed the more complicated the dish, the more impressive the host. Historians still argue whether the obsession with culinary spectacle was cultural pride or culinary insecurity. And just as your stomach growls, the signal comes. A flute plays. The host has entered. He's wearing a fresh toga so white it nearly blinds you, and a grin so rehearsed it squeaks. He nods to the most important guest, claps the shoulder of the second most important guest, and then briefly makes eye contact with you. Maybe, or maybe he just looked past you. Hard to say. You follow the others toward the dining room, the triclinium. You're close to the back of the line. But not last. Last is never good. Last is for the friendless, the forgettable, or that one guy who used to be rich but now tells stories that start with "before my exile." You glance at the walls. Frescoes of mythological feasts stare down, judging your posture and tunic hemline. You do your best impression of someone who belongs. You walk toward the couches, and that's when it hits you. Where you sit will define your evening, your worth, and possibly your reputation for the next decade. Welcome to the Roman dinner party. You don't get to choose where you sit. That decision was made hours ago by someone wealthier, better connected, and almost definitely more passive-aggressive than you. At Roman dinner parties, seating is warfare. Not with swords or sandals, with pillows, posture, and proximity. The triclinium, despite sounding like a villain from a Marvel movie, is just a room with 3 dining couches arranged in a U-shape around a central table. Each couch can fit 3 people reclining on their left elbows, meaning 9 guests in total, not counting spillover in adjoining rooms. And you're one of the lucky 9. Allegedly, each couch has a name. Lectus imus lowest, lectus medius middle, and lectus summus highest. Sounds clear, right? Except plot twist. They're not ranked by altitude. They're ranked by prestige. And that prestige hinges on your position relative to the host, the door, and, in some cases, the food. Let's start with your current assignment. You're being led toward the lectus imus, the lowest couch, which might sound bad, but hold on. In classic Roman fashion, everything is more complicated than it needs to be. You're being placed second from the far left, a position known as the imus in imo, translation, the lowest of the low, but it's not the worst seat in terms of visibility. In fact, it might be a calculated move. This seat gets you a clear view of the entertainment. It's also the easiest to sneak out from. Should you need to fake an emergency toothache, historians still debate whether this spot was always a social dead end or if it sometimes allowed shrewder guests to hover just outside the inner circle, close enough to overhear secrets, but low enough to be ignored when things got heated. Like the ancient version of lurking on a group chat without ever replying. Meanwhile, you watch the most powerful guest glide into the lectus medius, center seat. This is the locus medius in medio, aka the honored guest seat. This person, let's call him Flavius Big Dealus, gets the spotlight. He can make eye contact with everyone, speak without craning his neck, and reach the best dishes first. You suspect his garum breath is already weaponized with confidence. Your host, naturally, sits to his right. That's the locus summus in medio, the host power seat. From here, he controls the room. Think of him as the conductor of a very slow, slightly tipsy orchestra. He raises his hand. Servants move. He laughs. Everyone pretends it's funny. And then there's you, elbow deep in your cushion. Trying not to seem as uncomfortable as you are, you realize now that your location not only affects your social rank, it determines your access to conversation, wine flow, and whether your clever comment about Apicus's cookbook lands or floats into silence. Every Roman knew where you recline is who you are, and the politics of positioning don't stop there. It gets personal. The host might intentionally place rivals next to each other to spark polite combat, or he might exile someone to the farthest couch to signal they've fallen out of favor. The dinner table becomes a map of grudges, ambitions, and favor debts. There's even a fringe theory, only half joking, that certain positions were cursed. Guests who sat in the outermost spot, next to the table's edge, were more likely to have their names forgotten in historical records. Coincidence? Maybe, or maybe bad luck has a seating chart too. Servants begin delivering the gustatio, the appetizer course. Eggs, olives, and little mushrooms that may or may not cause dreams about your grandmother. You reach forward, but hesitate. Are you allowed to serve yourself, or should you wait for the person beside you, who just coughed into their hand and wiped it on their tunic? A quick glance tells you the answer. Wait. Always wait. Especially when you're seated this low. You notice the central guest has already been offered the warm honeyed wine, while yours arrives lukewarm and slightly sour. You try not to make a face, but your eyebrows betray you. Someone sees. You're on the board now, judged for every blink. Meanwhile, Flavius Big Dealus is making a toast. He references Cicero, misquotes him, then laughs too loudly. The host responds with an approving nod, and another slave brings over a bonus dish just for him. Quail eggs in saffron sauce. you get lentils. Still, you know better than to complain. Romans loved hierarchy like modern people love Wi-Fi. It wasn't just accepted, it was the glue of civilization. Seating wasn't just comfort. It was a declaration of status, a litmus test of your political usefulness, a silent prophecy about your career trajectory. But, and here's the secret, sometimes, seating wasn't about you at all. It might be about your connection to someone else. You were placed near Marcus, something, because the host wants him flattered, and you're considered inoffensive enough not to ruin the mood. Or you're seated near the poet, because your presence will make his joke seem sharper. Congratulations! You're now part of a seating equation, not a guest. As the next dish arrives, snails roasted in cumin and fish sauce, you notice a pattern. The center of the U gets exotic dishes first. The outer edges, like yours, get the basics. Historians still argue whether this distribution was about logistics or a subtle way to reinforce class division via cuisine. You stab a snail with the dullest prong on your three-pronged fork and try not to sigh audibly. Above you, a mosaic shows Bacchus reclining with a grape cluster and suspiciously smug eyebrows. You suspect he never had to sit next to Marcus. And yet, despite the discomfort, you're beginning to see the system's elegance. This isn't chaos, it's design. A Roman dinner party wasn't just a meal. It was a diagram of power, drawn in couches, cushions, and breadcrumbs. You lean back, adjust your toga fold, and prepare for the next course. You're in the triclinium now, and suddenly, every angle matters. Literally, this room isn't just a space, it's a stage. And tonight, you're reclining on a prop, the triclinium. The formal Roman dining room is so named because of its three lecti, or couches. They're arranged in a horseshoe shape around a low central table called the mensa, which is slightly raised to display the food, not for convenience. If you want to reach that honey-glazed dormouse, you'll have to stretch like a drunken acrobat. Each couch has 3 spaces, known as loci, which means that everything from who enters first to who gets the wine with fewer flies in it is baked into this elegant geometric layout. You're on the lectus imus, the so-called lowest couch. But, like we said, don't be fooled by the name. This is ancient Rome. Everything is layered with hidden codes and aristocratic gaslighting. The couch directly across from you is the lectus medius, the middle couch, and it's the power hub. If this party were a Netflix drama, lectus medius would be the title screen. The highest status guest gets the center position there, locus medius in medio, and tonight, it's Flavius Big Dealus again, still droning on about Cicero like it's the first time anyone's mentioned him since 44 BCE. Your host, a man who oils his beard like it's a religious rite, takes the locus summus in medio. This gives him prime eye contact with every guest, as well as the perfect angle to micromanage wine distribution with a single eyebrow twitch. Then there's the third couch, lectus summus. Don't let the name summus fool you into thinking it's the best seat. It's kind of the overflow couch. You might find a military veteran here, a slightly disgraced philosopher, or someone who married it into relevance and hasn't stopped apologizing since. You glance around and realize something peculiar. These couches aren't just furniture, they're visual storytelling. They're 3 wooden sentences arranged to spell out who matters. Historians still debate whether this layout had roots in Etruscan rituals, or whether it just evolved to maximize humble bragging. What's clear is that everything from the width of the couches to their elevation on platforms was designed to be seen. Now, look at your posture. You're not sitting. You're reclining on your left elbow, feet angled away from the table, which is both elegant and mildly uncomfortable if you have bad joints. Why the left elbow? It frees the right hand to eat, drink, or gesture passive-aggressively at someone's poetry recital. In front of each guest is a cushioned soft, embroidered, and stained with the ghost of 100 past dinners. Yours has a faint smell of rose oil and goat, maybe both. You wiggle a bit to get comfortable, but not too much. Wiggling is for freedmen. You are technically a gentleman tonight, or at least one pretending well enough to stay invited. The table in the center, the mensa, holds ceramic platters stacked with starters, pickled radishes, mullet pear slices, and salted fish paste smeared artistically on flatbread. There's also a ceramic jug with stylized vines curling up its neck. You reach for it, then pause. It's not your turn. Remember, in this seating world, everything even reaching is ranked. You don't serve yourself unless your social superior has already done so. And even then, only if they haven't insulted you lately. There's an entire genre of Roman satire dedicated to people who reached too early and got served cold eel as punishment. As you lean back again, you catch sight of the ceiling fresco above. A painted bacchanal, wild figures dancing with amphorae, olives, flying through the air. There's a woman riding a leopard. She seems more comfortable than you, and still, the geometry of the room keeps you hypnotized. The U-shape doesn't just frame the food, it controls sound. The walls are designed to bounce whispers, allowing gossip to travel in the direction the host prefers. You overhear a quiet debate about the governor of Syria. You weren't supposed to hear that, but the room wanted you to. There's something eerily mathematical about it all. Where you lie determines what you hear, what you eat, and even how well others can see your reactions. You suddenly remember a fringe historical theory you once read, that these dining arrangements were used by secret cults to map out astrological patterns, that the couches corresponded to celestial bodies, and the dishes served reflected planetary moods. Is it true? Probably not. But given how much incense is in the air, you wouldn't be surprised if someone started invoking Mars over the fish sauce. The servants move silently around the room. You notice they walk in a curved path that avoids the central table's shadow. Not out of superstition, out of precision. They've practiced this route 1,000 times, minimizing disruption and maximizing deference. They never show their backs to the host. The room grows warmer. Torches flicker, casting shadows across gilded plates and silver knives. You begin to understand why every wealthy Roman obsessed over this ritual. It wasn't about eating. It was about being seen eating well. And yet, as you gaze across the couches, you realize something quietly heartbreaking. For all their elegance, these couches are also barriers. Nobody can truly face each other. Everyone's turned sideways, angled, indirect. Conversation comes with a twist, literally. There's no sitting across from someone and simply talking. The triclinium is beautiful, but it's built for performance, not connection. And right now, your elbow's starting to cramp. You shift again. Subtly, this time trying to pretend you're not losing circulation in your left arm. You're reclining. Yes, but it's the Roman version of relaxing, which feels more like slowly sliding into a sideways existential crisis. Across from you, Flavius Bigdelus is gesturing wildly with a fig in hand, as if he's debating Cicero himself and not just bragging about his new aqueduct tiles. He's in the spotlight, locus medius in medio, and loving every oily second of it. You're watching the rest of the seating chart like a political drama, and it's getting juicy. You notice the corners first. See, the Roman dinner couch is divided into 3 seats: the locus imus lowest, locus medius middle, and locus summus highest on each lectus. While the middle spot is usually the most prestigious, the corner positions, the ends of the horseshoe, are where the social ambiguity lives. And ambiguity, in Rome, is dangerous. You catch sight of an older man wedged into the end of the lectus summus. He's slouching slightly, his tunic more wrinkled than the others. This is Gaius something or other, a once influential magistrate now known mostly for his tendency to fall asleep during poetry. His placement, a calculated insult. He's not at the worst table, but he's at the worst edge of the worst table. That's not an accident. It's a whisper from the host, and everyone hears it. Historians still argue whether these corner seat demotions were a temporary slap on the wrist or a more permanent form of public exile. Some believe that a smart guest could recover their status by delivering a great toast or saving the host's life from a choking hazard. Others think, once you're cornered, you stay cornered. Across the way, you spot a younger man practically vibrating with discomfort. He's been seated beside someone vastly more important than himself, and he knows it. Every nod is too eager, every laugh too delayed. His job tonight is to flatter without upstaging, exist without offending. That seat is known informally as the stepping stool, not because it helps you rise, because it shows you who's already stepped on you. The woman across from him, on the other hand, is in a place of power. She's seated close to the host, possibly a cousin, possibly a political ally, possibly both. Her posture is flawless, her jewelry understated but expensive. expensive enough to bankrupt a library. She sips wine from a gilded goblet, not because she's thirsty, but because she knows everyone's watching how she holds it. And because in this room, grace is currency, you begin to see how fragile this seating map really is. On the surface, it's organized, elegant, almost sacred. But underneath, it's an arena of shifting alliances and delicate sabotage. Take the poet. For instance, he's technically a guest, but really, he's here to perform. He's been placed close enough to the host to suggest favor, but far enough from the honored guest to signal, entertain us. Don't talk too much. If he recites well tonight, he might inch closer next time. If he flops, he'll be dining in the atrium with the leftovers. Even food becomes a signal. The roasted boar that's being wheeled in now, that goes to the center first. You notice the corners are still nibbling on what might be lentil paste or possibly very old hummus. It's not about hunger, it's about messaging. The meat follows prestige. And prestige, at a Roman dinner party, is rarely accidental. You suddenly remember that story about Maecenas, Augustus's wealthy advisor. He once demoted a senator to the corner seat just for arriving 5 minutes late. Another time, he invited a guest only to place them directly between two bitter enemies because he enjoyed dramatic tension. Whether those stories are true, exaggerated, or complete fiction, they reflect a cultural truth. Seating is politics in tunics. There's also the ever-looming risk of being that guest, the one who jokes too soon, takes figs too fast, or, gods forbid, corrects the host on a historical fact. These people often find themselves shifted closer to the edge next time, or worse, uninvited. The corner, in that case, becomes a mercy. One of the more fringe theories you've heard suggests that Roman hosts would sometimes place a hidden scroll under the cushion of certain guests. Coded messages, perhaps, or subtle signals about debts owed or favors expected. No one's ever found definitive proof of this, but considering how much plotting happened at these tables, it's not outside the realm of possibility. Back in the real-time drama unfolding in front of you, Marcus. Something is trying to start a conversation about Egyptian trade routes. He's been placed beside a senator's brother. An intentional placement meant to test whether he can keep up without saying something embarrassing. So far, it's not going well. He just called Alexandria that sandy fish hole. The senator's brother smiles politely. The host raises an eyebrow. You watch it all unfold and pretend to be very interested in your cumin-dusted lentils. That's the unspoken job of the mid-rank guest. Observe, absorb, and avoid eye contact at critical moments. You sip your wine, which has warmed slightly under the torchlight, and reflect. This room is less a feast and more a board game. Every couch, every cushion, every crumb is part of a greater puzzle. The only difference, in this game, no one tells you the rules. You find out by watching who gets the best dates and who gets a sour look. And tonight, you're realizing something important. You might not be in the center, but you're not in the corner either. Not yet. The host lifts his goblet with an easy, performative grace, just enough wrist to show confidence. Not enough to suggest he's ever done real work. The room quiets as if on cue. This is his moment. And his seating chart, his masterpiece. You watch him survey the room, eyes flicking to each couch like a general reviewing the battlefield. He doesn't speak yet. He doesn't need to. His guests know their roles. The poet stops fidgeting. Flavius Bigdelus lowers his voice. Even the serving slaves hover mid-step. Here's the thing. A Roman dinner host isn't just feeding people. He's curating status, manufacturing influence, and occasionally engineering petty humiliation with the elegance of a man adjusting grapes on a silver tray. And tonight, you're part of his etzable theater. Historians agree that elite Roman hosts didn't just invite people they liked. That's far too modern a concept. They invited people who were useful, people who owed them, people they wanted to impress, and, often, people they wanted to quietly destroy. Hosting was a tactical event diplomacy by dinner. You begin to understand the host's invisible string pulling. Take, for example, the senator's niece seated across from the philosopher with the impressive beard but absolutely no sense of humor. She's young, politically connected, and unmarried. He's brilliant, widely disliked, and surprisingly rich. Their proximity to Knight isn't random, it's matchmaking, disguised as appetizer sharing. Then there's the minor official from Ostia. No one seems to know why he's here, but he's been seated close to the musician, which tells you everything. He wasn't invited for his conversation. He's here to clap at the right moments. The host, meanwhile, is doing what Roman hosts do best, pretending to be casual while executing a social chess match with olives and eye contact. He leans toward Flavius Bigdelus, just a little, just enough for the room to wonder what was whispered. Bigdelus chuckles, a bit too loud. The host reclines again, glancing around to see who noticed. Everyone did. That moment, it wasn't for Bigdelus, it was for the rest of you, a reminder of who the real center of gravity is. And yet, the host isn't cruel, not obviously. He shares a plate with a less important guest, cracks a mild joke at his own expense, and even compliments the poet's latest work, though you suspect he hasn't read it. It's all part of the performance. Hospitality, in Rome, is power softened with honey. You think back to that time you heard about the infamous dinner of Lucullus, yes. That Lucullus, who once hosted 2 guests so lavishly that the leftovers could have fed a province. The kicker, he'd planned for just himself. When the servants asked why so much food for a solo meal, he reportedly replied, "Tonight, Lucullus dines with Lucullus." Whether or not it's true, it reveals the psychology of the Roman host. Opulence is a language, and sometimes you throw a feast not to honor a guest but to remind yourself how powerful you are. Tonight's host, while less extravagant, is no less calculating. The wine is flowing faster toward the lectus medius, the best fruits, figs, pomegranates. Dates are being hand-picked and passed selectively. You, meanwhile, receive something that might be a pear or might be a slightly chilled onion. Still, you don't complain. The host notices complaints, and he never forgets them. Historians still argue whether hosts used dinner seating to settle personal scores or simply to reflect public hierarchies. But there's a growing belief that many invitations were loaded with quiet expectations, support, and a vote. A favor repaid, silence on a family scandal, and sometimes the host simply wanted to observe reactions. Like tonight, earlier, a former rival was placed near the atrium, technically still inside the party, but far enough to be symbolically exiled. He's been chewing the same piece of bread for 20 minutes, staring into a wall mosaic of a bored-looking Neptune. That's not just neglect, that's a message. Meanwhile, the host raises his goblet again, this time a toast. To friends, he says, and to the memory of those who once sat here, a polite nod to the recently deceased. Maybe a dig at someone who declined the invitation. Romans love their double meanings like they love their garum strong, layered, and slightly fishy. You raise your own goblet in return. Yours is a rougher clay than the silver ones at the center, but hey, it still holds wine. And wine is the great equalizer. Until, of course, the amphorae run dry for your couch while the lectus medius gets a fresh batch. The poet tries to follow up the toast with a short verse. It's about friendship. It rhymes. Unfortunately, a few guests clap politely. One nods off. The host smiles thinly, just enough to suggest he's not planning to fire the poet's patron. Yet, you begin to appreciate the real genius of the Roman host. He knows exactly how close to the fire to let everyone sit. Not close enough to burn, but close enough to sweat. And sweat you do, because now you're wondering, how was your name chosen? Was it loyalty? Humor? Were you seated beside a Marcus? Something because the host finds you amusingly average, or because he's gauging whether you'd support his new bill in the Senate. Either way, you're here, reclined, observed, grateful, and a little bit anxious. The host looks your way, and for a fleeting moment, just a flash of torchlight in his eye, you feel like you've passed some invisible test. Your presence here, you're beginning to understand, isn't a compliment. It's a transaction. That invitation you received, the wax-sealed scroll hand-delivered by a grim-faced slave, it wasn't out of affection, or admiration, or because the host just loves your company. No, you were invited because you have value, strategic value, or, at the very least, potential comedic value. In Rome, dinner invitations are written in invisible ink, and that ink always spells obligations. As you sip from your slightly chipped goblet, you scan the other guests. Who else here was summoned as a pawn? Who's here to curry favor? Who's here as a punishment in silk? Let's start with the easiest target, the client. He's seated near the door, half reclining like a man who isn't sure if he's really allowed to lie down. His tunic is clean, but you can tell it's been mended too many times. He's smiling too wide, laughing too often, and complimenting the fig paste as if it were divine nectar. It's almost sweet until you remember this is the 5th time you've seen him pour wine for someone else while barely sipping his own. Clients were once slaves or lower-status freemen who became permanently tethered to the patronus, their social sponsor. In exchange for meager protection, they'd show up every morning at his door, salutatio and fawn over him like groupies outside an arena. A dinner invitation. In this context, isn't generosity, it's performance. The host includes his client not out of kindness, but because every Roman room needs contrast. You need someone in the room who will laugh too loud, someone who can be served slightly sour grapes without protest, someone who reminds the other guests how high they've climbed. The client is here not to eat but to make everyone else feel full. Then there's the freedman, a former slave. Now technically free, but socially complicated. You spot him near the edge of the lectus summus, nodding along to a joke he doesn't understand. His tunic is expensive, but his posture betrays him. Too upright, too eager. He's brought a scroll as a gift for the host, likely full of clumsy odes about honor and figs. Historians still argue whether these freedmen ever truly escaped their social origins. Some rose to enormous wealth-owning ships, bathhouses, even libraries. But wealth, in Rome, wasn't the final word. Blood still talked louder. A freedman could own land, command slaves, and still be seated where the cushion smells faintly of vinegar. Next to the freedman, there's a guest whose presence baffles you. The novus homo newman, a self-made politician whose family name no one can pronounce. He smiles with his mouth, but not his eyes. You can feel his desperation from 3 cushions away. He's not here to enjoy himself, he's here to be seen. He probably rehearsed his entrance in the atrium. Twice. The new man is both admired and mocked. Romans respected ambition. In theory, in practice, they preferred it stay out of their dining rooms. You glance back toward the host and try to read his expression. Is this dinner a reward or a trap? A famous letter from Pliny the Younger once described a dinner where guests were served in tiers, the best cuts of meat for high-status diners, bland vegetables for the mid-tier, and mealy bread for the expendable. No one complained. To complain was to admit you'd noticed the insult. That's the genius of Roman hosting. It weaponized politeness. And speaking of weaponized invitations, let's not forget the +1. Well, +1. Yes, there's one here tonight too. Likely the cousin of a client, or the guest of a guest. He arrived nervously, dressed slightly out of season, and has been sipping his wine with the exaggerated caution of a man terrified of spilling anything on the mosaic. No one has asked his name. He's been introduced twice to the same person. He won't be invited again. You remember a fringe theory whispered by bored scholars that some Roman hosts invited intentional outsiders, strangers, foreigners, even jesters, just to give the party someone to exclude. A living cautionary tale reclining on the edge. Is it true? Maybe, maybe not. But tonight, it certainly feels true. As the next course arrives, baked dormice with poppy seeds. You watch the serving patterns again. The better guests receive silver plates. You get polished ceramic. The freedman gets a wooden tray. The +1 gets his food placed on bread. No dish at all. You try not to react, but your face betrays you again. You've been placed here, in this exact seat, for a reason. The host is watching your manners, your restraint, your humor. He's calculating. Will you offer something useful later? A vote? A story? A secret? Or will you just sit here quiet, observant, ultimately forgettable? Suddenly, someone sneezes. The freedman blesses them. The client blesses them louder. The host raises a single eyebrow, and both men immediately pretend to be studying their wine. You almost laugh but catch yourself because you realize this dinner isn't food. It's theater. Each guest is a prop, a line of dialogue, a plot twist waiting to unfold. The food is the script. The couches are the stage. And the host, he's directing with invisible strings and a seating chart that might as well be a map of Roman ambition. You reach for a slice of fig. Not too fast, not too slow. Your performance continues. A silver platter passes by your shoulder. On it, pickled mushrooms. Douse it in fish sauce and garnished with mint leaves that look a little too fresh to be from Rome. It goes right past you, straight to the lectus medius. Of course, you turn your head slightly just enough to glance at the couch next to your Ours. It's the lowest one in the configuration, the one with the fewest eye lines and the weakest wine. This is where the social padding sits. The guests no one wanted to offend, but also didn't want to dignify. You're watching the real human wallpaper of the Roman Scena. Clients, freedmen, distant relatives. And tonight, a man named Lucius. You've never met him, but you've already overheard enough to build a working dossier. He's a libertinus. A freedman who used to work for a senator. He still wears the manners of servitude like a tunic. His sentences always end with flattery, and his laughter always arrives half a second too late. He was given this invitation because the host owed his former master a favor. You doubt they'll talk tonight. Seated next to him is his son. Younger, smoother, nervous, clearly trying to look the part. His hair is oiled. His sandals are spotless. He's been seated next to a minor equestrian and keeps nodding too eagerly at things he doesn't understand. This is Roman social mobility in action. Fragile, hopeful, and utterly dependent on the seating chart. A group of men at the center table begins retelling a story about a corrupt tax collector in Gaul. You hear laughter, the word donkey, and the unmistakable cackle of someone important trying to appear relaxed. Lucius chuckles along. His son does too, then stops. He didn't get the joke. Neither did you. That's another feature of this dinner. Not everyone is meant to get it. Dinner parties, for elite Romans, weren't just networking events. They were controlled environments where hosts could display generosity while subtly reinforcing who still held the reins. And the people on the fringes like Lucius and his son were walking proof of that. There's even a term for it. Token seating, a practice where a low-status guest was included not for conversation, not for contribution, but as a symbol, a social ornament. Look how generous I am, the host's seating chart says. See how I include the unimportant. Historians still argue whether token guests ever turned these moments into genuine social advancement. There are records of freedmen who leveraged single dinner invites into political positions, but far more often, they remained exactly what they were. Decoration. Across the triclinium, the poet is reciting something now. You can't hear every word, but there's rhythm and something about figs and destiny. The freedman applauds. The +1 claps too early. The host half smiles. The atmosphere shifts again as another course arrives. Roasted peacock breast on beds of honeyed lentils. The scent drifts toward your end of the room but never quite lands. You receive cabbage, boiled with vinegar. You do not react. You've learned by now, the food isn't nourishment, it's code. Better plates go to those with better connections. It's not about taste, it's about proximity. Then a woman enters. She's late. She's accompanied by 2 attendants, and she is not smiling. All movement slows. You recognize her, the wife of a provincial governor. High-ranking, rich, widely rumored to have bankrolled at least one senatorial campaign. She doesn't recline, she sits upright on a carved stool placed just outside the couch arrangement. Her position says everything. She is close enough to observe, far enough to remain untouchable. The women at Roman dinners, when allowed, often occupied strange social no-man's lands like this present but not participatory. Dignified, silent, occasionally whispered about but never addressed directly. Tonight, though, she's speaking to the host, and he's listening, which means the seating chart just got rewritten if not physically. Then symbolically, she isn't on the couches, but her presence bends the energy of the room. The freedman stops talking mid-sentence. Even Flavius Big Dealus tones it down. You lean into your cushion and take it all in. The arrangement, the hierarchy, the delicate balancing act between inclusion and insult. And then you catch something. A gesture from the host, barely perceptible. A hand flick toward the client. A servant immediately brings him more wine. It's not out of kindness. It's choreography. The host has seen something shift. Perhaps the governor's wife commented on the wine. Perhaps she noticed the guest with the chipped cup. And just like that, the optics must be corrected. This is the Roman scena, not a feast, but a living sculpture, always being reshaped by glances, murmurs, and calculated generosity. A fringe theory you once heard floats back to mind. Some Roman households allegedly kept guest logs, secret scrolls recording every reaction, every overreach, every misstep. Seating at future dinners was adjusted accordingly. It's unproven. But again, given the paranoia of Roman politics, it wouldn't surprise you. You glance again at Lucius. He's smiling, grateful for the wine. His son whispers something in his ear. They both nod. For a moment, they almost look like they belong. Almost. And then someone sneezes again. The freedman blesses them first this time. He's learning. He wants to be invited back. You take another sip of your own wine, still warm, still slightly vinegary, but now you know to appreciate it. Because in this room, every sip is placement. The peacock bones have been cleared. The poet has returned to awkward silence. And now the room shifts, not in volume, but in tone. You feel it the way you feel weather before it arrives. Because now, the women are involved. It's a quiet entry. No formal announcements. Just a few elite women trailing behind the torchlight. They glide more than walk, each accompanied by a silent servant, and not a single hem of their stola dares to brush the mosaic floor. The seating doesn't adjust. It never does, because Roman women, at least the ones from good families, don't recline. Not at these kinds of dinners. The couches belong to men. The women sit, or sometimes stand, or sometimes don't appear at all. Their presence tonight is a calculated exception. You see them settle onto low-backed chairs along the edge of the triclinium. It's like they're part of the furniture but better polished, more expensive, and far more dangerous. The most striking of the group sits directly beneath a fresco of Minerva, goddess of wisdom and strategy. Appropriate, considering the woman under her gaze is known for both. She's the sister of a well-positioned senator and the widow of a famously poisoned magistrate. That's Rome for you, marriage, murder, and manners all at the same table. You notice how the host immediately shifts his posture when she arrives. Not obvious, just a slight uncrossing of the ankles. He offers her a polite greeting and a second cup of wine. Hers is chilled. Yours, as you sip it again, is increasingly not. Historians still argue whether elite Roman women were officially invited to dinner parties or simply allowed to appear. The truth is likely both, and neither. Rome loved its contradictions almost as much as it loved its gossip. Tonight, these women are not just accessories, they're audiences. And if there's anything a Roman man fears more than being seated in a bad spot, it's being seated in a bad spot while a clever woman is watching. The freedman, who has been quietly making progress in the social maze, visibly stiffens. He wipes his hands off his tunic and tries to look contemplative. The poet starts reciting again. Too loud. One of the women smirks. He stops. You don't blame him. These women don't need to speak to dominate a room. They're walking mirrors. Their expressions reflect status. Their glances define success or failure, and not all of them are silent. The widow under Minerva, she leans slightly forward and murmurs something to the host. He laughs, then changes the topic of the entire table. That, right there, is power. Unofficial, unwritten, real. Meanwhile, one of the younger women, perhaps no more than 16, is watching everything. Her eyes are still wide with curiosity. She clutches a small fan she doesn't need to use and stares at the central couch with a fascination that is both innocent and deeply calculating. You suspect she's here not as a participant, but as an apprentice. That's something people forget. Roman dinner parties weren't just performances, they were classrooms. Young women and young men, too, came to observe the unspoken grammar of ambition, how to laugh without mocking, how to flatter without groveling, how to sit still and listen, like your life depends on it, because sometimes it did. A fringe theory once proposed that the triclinium itself was designed for observation, not inclusion. That the angles, the sightlines, the carefully open walls all made for a kind of amphitheater, not for plays, but for performances of class and control. You believe it, because right now, as you glance around, every guest is performing just a little bit harder. The laughter is more polite. The toast's more restrained. Even Flavius Bigdelus has pulled back on his Cicero references. And as for the host, he's thriving. His room is balanced. His seating chart is humming. His female guests are present, properly impressed, and politely consuming nothing stronger than diluted wine with a few pomegranate seeds. The client shifts uncomfortably and glances toward the woman seated nearest him. He doesn't speak. He won't speak. He knows better. Because while Roman men are judged by where they sit, Roman women are judged by how they watch. There's a moment, quiet, brittle, when one of the women adjusts her chair just an inch, just enough to break a perfect symmetry. The room recalibrates. You wonder how many other guests notice. Then you remember something from Seneca's writings, one of his letters, maybe, or a bit of satire passed off as philosophy. He once wrote that a wise man should dine only with those who do not count seats, or who know they are already seated in the soul. Beautiful sentiment. Too bad nobody follows it. Especially not here, where every cushion is a ranking, and every woman in the room is fluent in a language of glances, sighs, and precisely timed exits. And speaking of exits, one of the women stands, slowly, elegantly. The host also rises slightly, just enough to acknowledge her departure. She doesn't speak as she leaves, and yet the message is clear. She saw what she came to see. The host watches her go, then pours himself more wine. You take another bite of whatever root vegetable has been assigned to your side of the couch and try to decide if the show is over. Or if it's just about to get interesting. The wine is flowing faster now. Or maybe it's just that your cushion has gone from firm to soggy, and your sense of time is drifting into that blurry space where the fourth cup begins to taste like the first, but something else is shifting. 2. Something harder to name. Because suddenly, the food starts speaking. Not literally, of course. That would be horrifying. But socially, symbolically, it's shouting. You've noticed it before. The better seats get better grapes. But now, it's unmistakable. A new dish arrives, something decadent, something steaming under a veil of saffron-scented steam. You catch a glimpse. Honey-glazed dormice stuffed with pine nuts and pepper. Lavish. Absurd. Exactly the kind of thing a Roman dinner party lives for. And where does it go? Dead center. Lectus, medius. Straight to Flavius Bigdelis and his inner orbit. The platter doesn't even tilt in your direction. You and the other lower-ranked guests are instead offered something else. Boiled turnips. Warm. Soft. And if you close your eyes and believe hard enough, possibly nourishing. This isn't an oversight. This is a message. In Roman dinner culture, food was the host's vocabulary of praise and punishment. You didn't just feed your guests, you ranked them by seasoning. Saffron for your allies, vinegar for the rest. You reach for a modest spoonful of lentils, while pretending not to glance across the room at the truffle-stuffed livers being devoured 2 couches away. And here's the cruel twist. Even when your food is good, you're not allowed to comment. That's a privilege reserved for the higher tiers. If you compliment the chef, it sounds like groveling. If Flavius does it, the host beams like he's been blessed by Jupiter himself. It's all about who gets to say what, and with how many olives in their mouth when they say it. You remember reading that Apicius Rome's celebrity cookbook author and chaos enthusiast once prepared flamingo tongues, jellyfish stew, and a goose liver soufflé just to one-up a rival host. Some of his recipes survive today. Others, thankfully, do not. Historians still argue whether his culinary excess was personal madness or strategic status warfare. But here, in this room, you see the echoes. Every platter, every dish, is a flex. And the best part, none of it's about taste. Roman palates weren't after subtlety. They chased spectacle complex sauces, bizarre animal parts, improbable pairings, not because they were delicious, because they proved something. The host lifts a delicate slice of lamprey. Yes, the slimy river fish Romans weirdly adored, and offers it, on the flat of his knife, to the senator seated 2 cushions down. The gesture is smooth, performed, practiced. Everyone watches. You pretend not to, and that's the other secret power of food at a Roman dinner. It gives the host the power to stage moments, to offer or withhold, to spotlight, to slight. That moment when a second helping is brought only to the middle couch. Not generosity. That's a televised declaration of value in the form of reheated eel. The freedman on the corner couch. He tries to wave down a servant for more bread. The servant glances toward the host first, not subtly, and then walks past. You feel it in your chest. That creeping awareness. This food isn't meant to fill you. It's meant to rank you. Even the utensils simple. For you shall you. Ornate. For them tell the story. The higher guests have delicate silver prongs. You, a sturdy bronze spoon, warm from a previous diner. You scrape lentils with a silence that feels heavier than it should. The host begins discussing a rare imported spice, long pepper. From the east, someone tries to guess its cost. Someone else tops the guess. The host chuckles and says, "Oh, it was a gift," which is the Roman way of saying, "It was very expensive, and I want you to know I didn't have to pay for it." And the spice, "It's only on 3 dishes tonight." You can guess which 3. You look down at your plate and realize that even your vegetables have been seasoned with caution. No bold flavors, just salt. The culinary equivalent of "don't speak unless spoken to." A fringe theory you once heard comes back to you that Roman hosts occasionally included inedible dishes as tests, foods made to look extravagant but laced with strange spices or overwhelming flavors. Only the bravest or stupidest guests would eat them, and their reactions would be quietly noted. It sounds absurd, but tonight, you see something that makes you wonder. A young equestrian bites into something glossy and blue. His face spasms. The woman beside him stifles a laugh. The host raises one eyebrow, barely, and moves on. The equestrian doesn't get offered anything else for a while. It's not a coincidence, because in this room, nothing on the table is really food. It's all currency. The grapes are favors. The cheese is silence. The desserts are, well, we're not there yet. And when the honey cakes do arrive, they're handed out one at a time. First, to the honored guest, then to the host's cousin, then the poet, possibly out of pity. Each slice is laid gently on a fig leaf, passed with precision. By the time it reaches your couch, there are 2 left, you and Marcus. Something? Lock eyes for a brief second. You both know only one slice will make it to this cushion. The other will veer sideways, possibly to the late arriving philosopher who keeps quoting Lucretius. You say nothing. Marcus clears his throat. The servant pauses, looks toward the host. The host lifts one finger, just barely. The honey cake lands in Marcus's lap. You get the fig leaf, and not even the sweet kind. Seneca once wrote that a wise man should avoid lavish dinners, where the meat is fresher than the morals and the silver gleams brighter than the conversation. You remember that now, his tone somewhere between grumpy philosopher and dinner party dropout. And as you stare down at your empty fig leaf, where a honey cake almost existed, you begin to agree. Almost. The dinner has entered what Romans called secunda mensa, the second table, or dessert course. But unlike modern desserts, this isn't about sugar and smiles. This is the sharpest phase of the evening, because now everything is looser. The wine has done its work. The masks slip just a little, and the hierarchy, still rigid, but now dressed in velvet and sarcasm, the host, who's barely eaten but has poured wine like it's part of a military campaign, is glowing. Not sweaty, glowing. He's landed every move. He's elevated his allies, humbled his rivals, and just now, he's given a single candied pear to the governor's wife served personally. That is a political sonnet in fruit form. Meanwhile, across the lectus summus, the freedman coughs softly. No one notices. He sips his 4th glass of watered wine. It tastes of respectability, diluted. You recline deeper, feeling the curve of the cushion press against your spine like a warning. Stay pleasant, stay quiet, stay seated in more ways than one. The host claps his hands. A performer enters, not a singer, not a dancer. Tonight, it's a mimus, a mime. Not like you're imagining. This mime isn't trapped in an invisible box. No, Roman mimi were far raunchier, usually wordless but emotionally messy. This one is enacting some kind of scene involving a cheating husband, a runaway goat, and what appears to be a surprisingly limber olive merchant. Flavius Bigdelis is howling with laughter. The senator's niece looks mildly horrified. The host just smiles thinly. This, you realize, is entertainment as calibration. The performance isn't for fun. It's to test the room. Who laughs too much? Who blushes? Who pretends not to watch but doesn't look away? You, of course, adopt the safest pose. Slight smirk, slow sip, eyes casually focused on the fig leaf in front of you. Historians still debate whether Roman dinner entertainment was always this odd, or if the surviving records overemphasize the scandalous bits. What's clear is that this was never just for joy. It was about control of mood, of pace, of perception. The mime concludes with a pratfall into a ceramic jug and a groan that sounds suspiciously like a political opinion. Applause follows. You join in modestly, 3 claps enough to register, not enough to stand out. And that's when it happens. The host, still seated in his supreme position, turns toward the lectus, amidst your couch, and says something just loud enough for everyone to hear. So, my friend, what did you think of the show? The room stills. You weren't expecting this. Your mouth is dry. Your wine's too warm to help. It's a test. You could play it safe, say amusing, laugh, agree with Flavius. But something in the host's eyes says he's looking for more than that. He's bored. And you've just been promoted temporarily to wildcard. You choose your words carefully. Entertaining. You say, then, after the beat, though the goat deserved better. Laughter. Not just polite, genuine. Even the poet chuckles. The host smiles. You've passed something. Not a promotion, but a recognition. A tiny crack in the social ceiling above your couch. The next tray comes by, and without looking at the host, the servant places a candied date directly on your fig leaf. Progress. And this is where Seneca might roll his eyes again. Because despite everything, despite the inequality, the spectacle, the quiet humiliations you're feeling, good, slightly elevated. Scene. Seneca hated this part. He called it hollow praise served in honey. But you're starting to suspect he just never got the good seats. The poet begins another recitation. Something light, finally about spring, birds, and wine. He's not bad tonight, probably pre-approved by the host. The governor's wife even nods once. You glance around the room and realize the dynamics have settled. For now, the client is drunk enough to forget where he is. The freedman is staring at his lap. The mime has vanished. The host is swirling his goblet and already planning the next dinner. And you're still on the lectus amidst, but your fig leaf is less empty now. A fringe theory returns to your mind, a ridiculous one. Probably, but tonight it feels true. That the secunda mensa wasn't just dessert. It was a form of social reset, that the sweetness at the end could smooth over the salt of earlier slights. A bribe, a balm, a promise that maybe, next time, you'd get the better cut of lamb. You lean back. The torchlight has softened. The room hums like a sleeping animal. And in your mouth, the candied date dissolves like a quiet apology. You are now reclining in the sweet spot between full and uncomfortable, between amused and slightly ashamed that boiled turnips ever made you grateful. But here's the irony. You're now sitting in the most dangerous seat in the room. Not literally, your cushion hasn't moved. But socially, you've crept into the periphery of attention. And in Rome, that's where accidents happen. This is the curse of the middle couch, lectus medius. No, you're not sitting on it. But your last comment earned you a glance from the host, a chuckle from Flavius Big Delus. And now, several people who hadn't previously known your name are nodding slightly in your direction. You're orbiting the middle now. You may not want this, but it's too late. Because that middle couch, it's not a throne, it's a spotlight. And spotlights are hot. You watch Flavius bask in his center position. It looks glamorous. He's draped like a statue, sipping rare wine and tossing out casual references to naval battles. You're pretty sure he didn't fight in. But if you watch closely, you see the cracks. He hasn't actually eaten anything in a while. He hasn't leaned back once. Every word he says is weighed, calculated, and timed for maximum ripple effect. And every time the host shifts his gaze, Flavius flinches ever so slightly, wondering if he's about to be replaced by the next charming nobody with a fig joke. Historians still argue whether the locus medius in medio, that coveted center spot, was a reward or a test. Some believe it was a trap, a place to flatter, yes, but also to expose. From that angle, everyone can see you, hear you. Remember your worst opinions in perfect detail. You start noticing how others treat the middle guest. With deference, yes, but also with precision. They respond to his jokes one beat late, laugh half-heartedly, offer toasts that somehow include but don't center him. Everyone loves a star until the star forgets their place. And then there's the host, reclining just to Flavius's right, close enough to dominate the space, distant enough to pretend he's just letting others shine. It's genius. Really, the host controls the rhythm of the night while the honored guest absorbs the weight of expectation. You begin to understand why some guests secretly avoid the middle couch. Too much pressure. Too many chances to say the wrong thing to the wrong person at the wrong angle. Across the room, the mime has returned, this time in a new costume, something involving goat horns and a very suggestive grapevine. You don't want to know what this one's about, but it's the perfect distraction for what happens next. Someone spills a cup, not just any someone. The young novice homo. The new man who's been sweating through his borrowed toga since the appetizers. The wine hits the mosaic with a slap. The room pauses. The mime freezes mid-vine thrust. The host stops swirling his goblet. The freedman exhales through his nose, grateful it wasn't him. The young man stands, stammers, apologizes. The cup is bronze, not expensive, but the stain reaches toward the lectus medius, toward Flavius. This is a nightmare. And here comes the real twist. The host smiles. He waves it off with a laugh and says, a libation to Bacchus, may we all be so devout. Polite laughter follows, but you can see it. The moment is filed, not forgotten. That man's seed is now radioactive. He'll be lucky if he is ever invited again, let alone given anything but boiled cabbage in a corner to stare into. And Flavius, his expression never changes. He doesn't blink. He just keeps sipping. That's how you stay in the middle. You pretend accidents don't splash. You lean back deeper into your cushion. Your arm is starting to ache from reclining so long. You adjust slightly, catching the flicker of a torch reflecting off silverware you'll never touch. A fringe theory pops into your mind, one you read scribbled in the margins of a translated satire, that Romans believed the seating chart mirrored the structure of fate. The middle was the peak, the summit. And from there, the only way was down. Some even believe that sitting in the center couch too often could invite bad luck. That repeated exposure to attention would anger the Larry's household gods, who preferred humility and regular offerings over constant applause. Silly. Maybe. But as the novice homo sits down again, red-faced and silent, you start to wonder if he just touched a thread of that ancient tension. Because in Rome, success isn't measured by what you gain. It's measured by how long you survive having it. The next dish arrives, oysters with herbs, imported, chilled, rare. It goes to the middle couch. Of course, but this time, you notice Flavius doesn't touch them. He simply smiles, nods, and gestures for them to be passed on. A generous act. No, a deflection. A shield. He's making room for someone else to stumble. Maybe you sit straighter. No, you recline straighter. Because in this game, posture is strategy. The middle couch may be the place everyone wants. But now you see it for what it is. Not a reward, a stage, and every spotlight has its heat. The wine is deeper now. Not just in color, though. This amphora has a richer, more plum-stained hue, but in consequences, you've reached the vinum veritas phase. The moment when wine no longer complements the evening. It starts speaking for it. And in a Roman dinner party, that's when things start slipping. It begins quietly. A guest on the lectus summus. A minor magistrate with the breath of boiled onions and the volume of a marching legion starts recounting a story about pirates. You think it's a parable until it gets oddly specific and includes a name and a date. A senator nearby raises an eyebrow. So this is happening. Wine in Rome wasn't just a beverage. It was a ranking system in a cup. The stronger the wine, the stronger the status. The center couch drinks it aged, pure and undiluted, maybe even from imported glassware. The outer couches, diluted to the color of old bathwater, and served in cups that look suspiciously recycled. Tonight, your wine has thickened slightly, less vinegar, more weight. You're being noticed, rewarded, or tested. Historians still debate whether the Romans had a formal rulebook for wine dilution. Some sources mention strict ratios. 1 part wine, 3 parts water, while others describe hosts who adjusted the strength based on their opinion of the guest. If someone was charming but dangerous, half strength, boring but loyal, full pour. You take a sip, it tastes like expectation. Flavius Big Dealus, still on the middle couch, has reached the point of storytelling. He's sharing a hunting tale. Wild boar, Tuscany. Lots of shouting, probably exaggerated, possibly fabricated. But no one interrupts, because when a middle guest talks during Vinum Veritas, the polite response is to listen. Even if the story involves a wounded lion that sounds suspiciously like a sheep with bad eyesight, you glance down the line. The freedman isn't drinking anymore, just holding his cup like it might leak secrets. The client is laughing too hard. He's entered the desperation cackle phase. A servant gently removes his fifth goblet and replaces it with water. Then you hear it, a name, whispered, yours. It came from the couch behind you, a quiet mention. Nothing loud, but loud enough to reach the host. You feel it ripple. And here's the thing. In Rome, drunk talk isn't just talk. It's evidence. And everyone in this room knows it. That's why the lectus imus your couch is both safest and most dangerous. You're not watched closely enough to be held accountable, but you're visible enough to be blamed later. The ideal scapegoat, a polite distance from power and just enough wine to trip over your own story. You lean back again, eyes half closed, and let the conversation wash over you. Now the host speaks, not loudly, but with that smooth, anchoring cadence that pulls every ear toward him like a magnet. He's telling a story about Athens, about a symposium, about a philosopher unnamed who drank too much and began reciting epic poetry from memory. No one interrupted. They let him go. For hours, the punchline. That philosopher now lives on a goat farm. Laughter, of course, but pointed laughter. The novus homo stiffens. The poet suddenly forgets his next line. Even Flavius looks like he's calculating whether he's ever been compared to a goat. And you do nothing. Just smile, slow and harmless. Because the wine is talking now and you don't want it talking through you. A fringe theory you once read said Roman hosts would sometimes mix truth serum herbs into wine during this phase. Tiny amounts. Not poisonous, just loosening. It's likely apocryphal. But the wine tonight does seem sharper, more persuasive. One guest, an older man with a military haircut and a chip on his shoulder, leans forward and starts talking about corruption, tax collectors, the grain supply, names, details. The host lets him speak for precisely 13 seconds before laughing and redirecting the room with a sudden toast to the endurance of the Roman stomach. Everyone laughs. Topic closed. That's how you control a room in Rome. Not with silence. With interruptions disguised as charm. You sip again. Your wine is stronger now. Confirmed. You are being given a longer leash. And yet, you know the leash is still a leash. Because as the night deepens and the flickering lamplight paints everyone in soft shadows and olive oil glow, it becomes clear. Vinum Veritas is a game of thresholds. Say too little, you're dull. Say too much, you're dangerous. Say just the right thing at just the right moment. That's how you change couches. You notice the poet gathering courage. His voice rises again, this time reciting from memory, a line about Saturn devouring his children. Probably not the best pick. The governor's wife tilts her head. The host raises a brow. Flavius chuckles a little too loudly. The moment passes, but not unnoticed. You've survived this round. You swirl your cup, noting the dregs at the bottom swirling in slow, syrupy circles. Another guest lifts his goblet toward you, an invitation. A silent, your turn. You nod politely and do not speak because you've seen what happens to people who get too honest during Vinum Veritas. They end up telling stories they shouldn't, or reciting lines that sound too much like confessions, or waking up the next morning with fewer invitations and more rumors. So you just raise your cup and let the wine do the talking. You're beginning to notice things now. Tiny things. The way the torchlight flickers just a little longer when it passes over the host's couch. The way laughter from the lectus summus arrives half a second later. Always a little too loud, like it's trying to catch up. The way conversations drop into silence whenever the word inheritance is mentioned. You're deep into the entertainment hour. And in Rome, this isn't casual fun. It's survival theater. You spot the next act before the room announces it. A woman in gold bangles, a slim scarf twisted through her hair, steps forward with a small lyre. Her eyes scan the guests, not nervously, but knowingly. She's not here to be liked. She's here to hold power without owning it. She's a kaitharista, a hired performer, and everyone reclines just a bit straighter, even Flavius. Because here's the deal. If you don't react properly to the evening's entertainment, you're not just being rude. You're breaking the unspoken contract of being part of the host's carefully curated machine. Entertainment. In a Roman scena isn't just an afterthought, it's the emotional gear shift, the part that transitions the dinner from power posturing into emotional manipulation. She strums a chord, clear, deliberate, the kind of note that makes you feel like something just started without your consent. She sings, it's about a soldier's widow, or a doomed shepherd, or maybe a fig tree that never bore fruit. The meaning doesn't matter. What matters is who reacts. You look around. The freedman blinks too much. The client pretends to yawn. The +1 stares at his wine like it owes him money. The host watches them all. That's the trick. It's not about the performance. It's about how you perform in response. Who weeps too quickly? Who sighs at the right moment? Who doesn't make eye contact with the performer at all? You offer the safe move. Quiet attention, brow furrowed in thought. Not overly affected, not dismissive. Flavius, of course, does it better. He leans in with just enough emotional investment to suggest he's complex, cultured, and possibly in mourning for something vague and distant. He's good at this. The song ends. Applause not too loud, just polite enough to imply we're sophisticated, but not easily impressed. And then comes the next layer, conversational roulette. This is when the host begins floating questions not to everyone, but surgically to selected guests, always with a smile, always with "so tell us," phrased like a compliment and an ambush. You've seen this part before. The questions start light. What's the strangest thing you've seen in the forum? What would you trade to never deal with Roman tax law again? Which deity would you dine with if you couldn't choose Bacchus? Everyone chuckles. Lighthearted answers are shared, but the questions sharpen, just slightly, like a dagger being polished under the table. Which friend here would you trust with your life? Who at this table will outlive us all? If someone were to betray you, how would you handle it? Laughter again, but thinner, more brittle. Eyes shift. Jokes grow slower. This is the entertainment no one names. The game of gaze and implication. Historians still debate whether these dinner provocations were spontaneous or premeditated. The clever money says both. A host might drop a subtle line just to see who twitches, and based on the twitch, seating shifts at the next feast. You catch your own name again, this time in a compliment. Flavius says something about keen observers and glances your way. Is it praise? A test? An invitation? You smile. Carefully, not too broadly. You've learned now, even eye contact has rules. The poet tries to follow up with a few lines of verse. No one listens. The governor's wife frowns. The host tilts his head. And just like that, the spotlight moves. Now a boy enters the room. A servant, but dressed unusually, in white, hair oiled. He carries a tray with exactly 3 items, a burning censer, a scroll, and a single coin. You know this one. This is a symbolic act. The final entertainment. It varies from house to house, but the idea is always the same. Something abstract, borderline theatrical, a philosophical riddle, a challenge of wit, a surprise guest. It breaks up the gluttony and forces everyone to remember Romans were thinkers, not just eaters. The host gestures. The boy reads from the scroll. 1 table, 9 men. 1 knife. Who is safe? Silence. It's not a riddle. Exactly. More like a test of how you react under scrutiny. The freedman looks confused. The client looks terrified. The novus homo laughs too loudly. Again, the host smiles thinly. You sit quietly. You know the answer doesn't matter. It's the pause that counts. How long you wait, whether you look at your neighbor, whether you speak at all. The poet finally offers something vague about the one who isn't hungry. It lands like stale bread. The host nods once, and the boy departs. Torchlight dances on the gold leaf edges of the frescoes. A wind brushes through the atrium. Someone stifles a hiccup. You realize the scene is winding down, but not before the final move. The host leans forward and begins sharing secrets. Not real ones, of course. Just stories that feel close to forbidden. About a visiting Gallic chieftain who couldn't handle Roman wine. About a senator who married his niece. About a slave who disappeared with a scroll no one was supposed to read. It's gossip with a purpose. To bind the room, you nod along. You laugh at the right beat. You sip, you study, and you feel the weight of what this night has taught you. Entertainment. In Rome, is never just for pleasure. It's strategy, disguised as song. It's politics, masked as poetry. It's a dagger, dressed in honey, and you're still here, still reclined, still playing. You can feel it now, the shift, not in the cushions, which are still unforgiving slabs of elite discomfort, and not in the wine, which has grown warmer and more persuasive by the cup. It's the air, the silence between laughs, the way guests begin checking each other's sandals instead of the ceiling. You've entered the exit phase of the Roman dinner party, and no one knows how to leave. There is no official moment, no bell, no closing toast. The Romans, despite their love of order and lists and scrolls, never bothered to write down how to leave gracefully protocol, probably because nobody ever wanted to be the first to go. Being the first, dangerous. It implies boredom. It implies insult. And in Rome, implied insult is as good as declared war. So instead, the guests begin the ancient ritual of pretending to prepare to leave. A client slowly adjusts his sandal strap. He's not leaving. He just wants the host to notice he could leave. The freedman yawns audibly, but with a hand over his mouth, a gesture that says, "I'm tired," but still respectful. The poet gathers his scrolls dramatically, just in case anyone forgot he was here. You adjust your weight, subtly, a non-committal half-recline that signals nothing. Because here's the truth, exiting is its own game. You want to leave late enough to seem important, but early enough to not be the last poor soul offering commentary on marble floor design to an overworked servant. And above all, you don't want to insult the host. Because leaving is a message, and in a society built entirely on layered messages, this one echoes loudest when misplayed. The host knows this. He's watching everyone, still smiling, still poised. But the wine has made his face softer, and his posture slightly sloped. A few cushions have been fluffed under his elbow by an alert servant. This is what power looks like at midnight. Loosened, but not relinquished. He begins saying things like, "You must visit again, and next time, we'll roast an ostrich." None of these are promises. They are dismissals disguised as invitations. The governor's wife has already departed quietly. Earlier, with just a nod and the lightest clink of goblet to goblet, she knew when to vanish, like steam. Or strategy. Flavius Big Dealus, of course, isn't moving. He's riding this moment like a final lap, telling a story about a crooked banker in Hispania, full of raised eyebrows and unconfirmed details. Everyone laughs politely, but you can see the effort. The smiles are softening. The edges of attention are fraying. You remember reading a fringe theory that in particularly competitive circles, guests would bring excuses pre-written on scrolls, fake messages to unfold discreetly, pretending a family matter required their immediate departure. No proof this happened. But tonight, it feels possible because now comes the second danger, staying too long. To linger is to suggest you have nowhere else to be, that you're so dazzled by the party, you've lost your sense of timing. And worst of all, that you might outstay your host's patience. No one wants to be the guest still holding a half-eaten date while the servants begin sweeping the floor. The +1 fidgets. He's made it this far without major embarrassment. He's ready to slip out, unnoticed. But there's a problem. No one's moving. So instead, he knocks over his wine cup. Again, lightly. A repeat offense. The host nods once. Two servants appear. One begins dabbing. The other offers a fresh cup. But they also open a door. Subtle, polite, but unmistakable. The message is sent. The +1 departs. Quickly. He doesn't say goodbye to anyone, because he knows he wasn't expected to last this long. His exit is clean, erased behind him like a damp spot on mosaic tile. You take another slow sip. Your cup is almost empty now. Perfect. Not too rushed. Not suspiciously full. The ideal exit drink. Finished, but not dry. The host catches your eye again. Just for a second, a flicker. There it is, your signal. He's done with you, but not in a cruel way. In a Roman way, you've served your purpose. You performed well. You were useful. You rise, slowly, casually, aware of every thread in your tunic. You don't bow. You incline. You don't thank him effusively. Just enough. Your words are like your seating tonight. Measured, modest, slightly undercooked. As you pass the poet, he whispers something about meeting again at the baths. You nod. Maybe, maybe not. You exit through the atrium, where the air smells of old incense and cooling tiles, past the ancestral masks, who now seem less like judges and more like bored spectators. You step out onto the quiet Roman street, torchlight behind you, moonlight ahead, and for the first time all evening, you breathe. Outside, the city doesn't care who sat where. Dogs bark. A cart rattles by. Somewhere, someone's arguing about olive oil. You glance back just once. The domus is glowing from within. Laughter still leaks through the stone. Someone, probably Flavius, is still talking. But you're done. Your rank, your wit, your social dance, all cataloged by the host. And next time, you might be seated just a little closer to the middle. If you survive the turnips, the street is quiet and wider than it felt when you first arrived. Now, your feet hit the stones in a rhythm that doesn't belong to anyone else. You're alone. You're unaccompanied. You're post-scena, and that's a strange kind of freedom. Inside, the dinner party continues, though, really. It's just coasting on momentum now. The honeyed wine will get stickier, the stories will get louder, and the laughter will lose all punctuation. But you've made it out intact, and that counts for more than most guests will realize until tomorrow, when they wake up with a pomegranate headache and a memory of saying something they shouldn't have. Because what happens after the couch is that quiet walk. That return to your own threshold is just as telling as where you reclined. Rome doesn't forget, and neither does the host. You remember now, there were 9 official seats in that room, 9 named positions, 9 distinct layers of social currency, and even the act of slipping away from them meant something. Historians argue whether guests were ever officially graded, whether a scribe or servant stood in the shadows, jotting down who laughed at what, who reached too far for the sausage, who failed to toast back. There's no surviving record. But you know you were observed, measured, possibly admired, maybe even envied, for a second or two, when your fig joke landed. And that matters, because Roman dinner parties aren't just meals. They're moments of social calibration. You think about Lucius the freedman, smiling tightly, about the +1 with the nervous feet, about the governor's wife, who didn't need a couch to control the room, about Flavius, still clinging to the center of the table like a man gripping the last decent line in a mediocre play. And you think about yourself, your cushion, your cup, your silence, which sometimes meant more than someone else's applause. You were part of it, not leading, not forgotten, placed. That's what the Romans called it, placement. You weren't invited just to be fed. You were positioned, and from that position, you learned, you read the room. You responded just enough. Because Roman life isn't about certainty. It's about knowing how to move through uncertainty with rhythm, with style, with a sense of timing so precise it makes clockwork seem clumsy. And tonight, you timed it right. The street opens before you. You pass a neighbor's closed gate. Somewhere, water trickles from a public fountain. The smell of cooked onions and wine-soaked linen fades behind you. Tomorrow, people will talk. Maybe about the poet. Maybe about the mime. Maybe, if you're lucky, about that goat joke you dropped at just the right time. Or maybe you'll be forgotten, which, in Rome, isn't always a bad thing. You arrive home, your own cushion, your own jug of slightly worse wine. You sit, and the stillness feels like a reward. You survive the triclinium, not just with a full stomach, but with your dignity mostly intact, your reputation slightly elevated, and your name just maybe on a better couch next time. And in a city where seating is destiny, that's victory. The night is still now. The torches have dimmed. The silver trays have been cleared, and the sound of laughter has faded into a distant murmur behind stone walls. You are home. No cushions, no peacocks, no pressure, just the quiet weight of your own thoughts and the slow awareness that you moved through something ancient, something theatrical, something almost holy in its strange choreography. And now, all you have to do is sleep. The wine settles, the shadows stretch, the voices of the evening grow quieter with every breath. Let them fade. Let the senator's smug grin blur. Let the mime's chaotic dance dissolve. Let the fig leaf and the turnips and the bronze spoon rest somewhere beneath your dreams. You are not reclining anymore. You are floating above the couches, above the gossip, above the quiet war of bread and glances. There's nothing left to prove, no toasts to make, No glances to decode, just you. And sleep. Breathe slower now. Let your thoughts soften. Let the firelight flicker gently behind your eyes. You've survived Rome, and tomorrow you can sit wherever you like.